Wellness Solutions, Ketogenic Eating 101. We are so excited to have you here. It's just kind of fun to have everybody together. So it's just great that you joined us. Next slide. For those of you who don't know, I'm Lisa Hankey, and I'm co-founder of IWSI. And I retired about 18 months ago from a career in critical care equipment sales. My journey in wellness started over 15 years ago when I was first diagnosed with breast cancer. And this year I completed Duke University's Integrative School of Medicine's Health and Wellness program, Health and Wellness Coaching program. And then I passed, thank God, the Health and Wellness National Board certification put on by the Board of Medical Examiners. So I was real excited about that. And then my dear friend, who I think everyone knows, Barbara Borland, Dr. Borland.
Maybe not everybody.
She'll be sharing what she's learned about the keto. And Barbara graduated from Duke University with an undergrad in cellular biology and then her medical doctorate. And then did advanced training in diagnostic radiology. And most of Barbara's career has been in the, in the Tampa Bay area, where she supported women or really made a change in how breast health was addressed in the Tampa Bay area. Today, Barbara and I are incredibly grateful to be with IWSI, and where we focus on researching for the root cause of why people fall ill, age poorly, and lose their zest for life. And we do this because it is our passion to inspire others to make healthy living choices. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm getting it working. There you go.
There you go. To date, we're excited about several things. The first of them is LifeVantage's nutrigenomics. And then the improvements in people's health that we're seeing through improved microcirculation through the Beamer, and integrative listening systems and neuroplasticity is changing lives daily, especially for children, and our own crossover point where we want to see people grow, experience life as a community, to serve one another. So we're excited about all four of those things that we've looked into. Next slide.
I'm working on it. Sorry.
Okay, I'm good.
Oh, okay. There we go.
So we're just asking that you would keep your lines muted and your videos off for now. Yeah, we'll do our best to address any questions and comments at the end. Please go ahead and put your comments and questions into the chat section. The only thing we ask is we're going to be addressing the keto and what we've learned there, and cannot answer any specific medical questions. So Barbara, what the heck is keto all about, and why did you start it?
Well, I started out this year the last thing on my mind was going on some kind of diet, and I certainly didn't know anything about the keto. But I tell you what happened this fall was that you, Lisa, both of us got very interested in a movement in the area of Alzheimer's treatment. Found out all kinds of interesting information. We were just like, it was like a torrent of information coming in. But in the middle of all of that was this very, very compelling argument that people with Alzheimer's, at least a very high percentage of them, can benefit from something called the ketogenic diet. So I learned about what that was while I was studying Alzheimer's. So that kind of sets the stage. But then in September, I went to my new physician, an integrative medicine doctor, and I found out a little surprise. I found out that me, who has always been healthy and maintains a pretty good weight, maybe 5 pounds over, but whatever, I found out that I am pre-diabetic. Crazy. So by that point, I knew enough about the ketogenic nutrition plan. I said, well, that's bound to lower my glucose because I'm not planning on turning diabetic. That is not in my playbook. So I also knew that there were quite a few people that had family members that either were at risk for Alzheimer's or who had active Alzheimer's. And I wanted to tell them about this, but I'd also heard that the diet was a little strict and a little intimidating. So I said, well, why not? Why not me? I'll try it. So that's what I did. So where am I right now? I'm now 2 months into the ketogenic diet. I lost 7 pounds pretty quickly. I'm waiting for my blood tests. I get those done in a couple of weeks. I'm planning on them being better. I can report to you later about that. So anyway, that's why I got interested in the keto diet. Now, what I want to do in this little chat that we're going to have is I want to explain how the ketogenic diet relates to the whole movement of clean eating. We've all heard about eat clean. Well, keto is part of that. I also want to help you understand what I have learned recently about human physiology as it relates to the breaking down your food into energy. Now, I will tell you that the information I'm going to give you, I am not a nutritionist and I am not a biochemist by any means, but I think I've got it down to a simplistic enough thing that at least I understand it. I'll pass that on to you. I also want to talk about, well, what the heck actually is keto? So you have some definitions, talk about some potential benefits, some potential downsides, and then most important, I want to encourage you and give you the way to do your own research. So let's get going on this. So what is this a picture of? This is a picture of the SAD, the the Standard American Diet. High in processed food, this processed flour, all processed food, fats that are unhealthy fats, GMO laden, and the most important thing is sugar, sugar, sugar. Even those chicken nuggets have sugar in them. Even the bread has sugar in it. The ketchup has sugar in it. And of course, all the obvious things. This has been our diet, as we all know. We're all very aware that this is a massive problem, but let me give you some statistics that'll just, curl your nails. 1 in 2 Americans have a chronic disease. 1 in 3, one in 3 have either pre-diabetes or diabetes. 1 out of 3. 1 in 4 people have more than one chronic disease, and 1 in 6 have some kind of autoimmune disease. Children who used to live all their lives with basically healthy are now coming down with adult diseases like diabetes, elevated lipids, obesity, all the chronic diseases that are more typical of adulthood. What is the common denominator here? Our genetic background hasn't changed. No, our diet has changed. So this is the standard American diet. Now, I suspect that most of you on this webinar don't really eat that way, except maybe on occasion. You probably eat like the way this slide looks, right? You eat clean, reasonably clean. You go for healthy foods. You understand nutrition. You understand the basics about it. But why are we still having some struggles if we are avoiding that standard American diet? Why are we still struggling with weight control? Or why do we find ourselves unhappy with how we look in a swimsuit because of the excess fat? Why do we have inflammatory changes throughout our body, maybe arthritis or other kinds of issues, GI issues? And why do we still, like me, get some kind of actually defined condition like prediabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, inflammatory bowel disease? So if we're eating, quote, the right thing, what is it that's wrong? Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. There are so many great diets out there, and I am not an expert in all of these. I've just spent my time learning about keto lately, but all of these diets that I have placed up here, the Whole30, the Mediterranean diet, the Paleo, the Primal, these are all fantastic diets, and they have a basis in one thing, which is eating real food. So although I'm going to be focusing on the ketogenic diet, I want all of you who have an interest in improving your health to become researchers and to investigate and find out what might be best for you. But let's move forward and jump into what we have at hand tonight, which is to find out about the ketogenic diet. It all comes down to understanding macros, M-A-C-R-O-S, macros. There are only three components of food. They can be broken down in either the protein category, the carbohydrate category, or the fat category. Hold on just a second. And our food on a daily basis can be broken down into percentages of how much of our food comes from each of these three categories. The total percentage, of course, equals 100%, but there's a zillion ways to divide up your daily intake. You, in order to understand why looking at the distribution of your caloric intake on a daily basis with regard to macros, why that's important, I think what we really need to do is to have a better understanding of how each of these are utilized by the body to do what they're supposed to do, which is to create energy for life. So let's look into that. When we bring food into our body and it's ingested, most of it, or a good bit of it, a high percentage, is used immediately to provide energy for cellular function. And each of those change. Each of those are different. So as you bring protein into the body, it is broken down into amino acids. Most of the amino acids are immediately utilized to manufacture other proteins within the body, specifically neurotransmitters, but many of the proteins that we need for enzymatic function. There'll be a little bit of protein byproducts that are not used immediately. We'll talk about that in a minute. Carbohydrates are 100% broken down into sugar, glucose. They, for glucose to go out of the bloodstream, it requires insulin, which is secreted by your pancreas. That insulin is like the key that unlocks the door that allows glucose to go into the cell. The third macro, which is fat, is broken down into a few components, the primary one being fatty acids, a derivative of which is called ketones or ketone bodies. All of these three components can be used for the immediate support of cellular function. Glucose is the go-to macro as an energy source in the normal situation. Amino acids are primarily used as building blocks, and fatty acid components are primarily used to also be building blocks for certain compounds. It's glucose that our body is trained to run on. But what happens when we eat more than we need for immediate use? Well, let's take a look at that. It has to go somewhere. It goes to my hips. It goes to other people. It goes to their stomach. But it's stored as fat. Let's look at how that happens. Let's look at carbohydrates to start with. Whatever glucose is left over, that insulin is kicked in, and just like the insulin helped glucose go into the cells of, say, your heart or your lung, insulin is also used to bring glucose into your fat storage. Protein, whatever amino acids are left over, are reconfigured and broken down into glucose, which in turn requires insulin to be stored into fat. Whatever fat is not used for immediate purposes is changed into something called triglycerides, and that goes into storage as fat. So I hope that helps you just get a little idea of where your immediate energy sources come from. Glucose is the primary energy source with a secondary energy source of ketones, but glucose is it in the normal situation. And whatever's left over all goes to fat. Now, why does it matter whether our body is running on glucose or ketones? Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. When we are faced with a need for energy, the body first goes to the glucose is in the blood system. When there's nothing left, it then goes to the glucose stores that are in the muscles and in the liver. That's called glycogen. And then when all that's gone, and there's about a day and a half of glycogen stored in the body, at the end of that, the body has to find some place to get its energy. When the body gets into that, quote, starvation mode, it starts utilizing ketones the derivative of fats, using ketones to run the body, to do all cellular function. Well, our body is totally capable of doing that. That's why we can, as humans, survive going without food for many, many, many days. In fact, we were actually born, as newborns, we were in ketosis. Look at all the animals that hibernate through the winter. They sleep. As they sleep through the winter, they are in a state of ketosis. Ketosis meaning ketones, elevated ketones in the blood that reflects the breakdown of fat to produce energy for the body. So it does matter, and then let me go more into that. It matters because when our bodies are restricted from eating carbohydrates, we have to rely on ketones. So the basis of the ketogenic diet is to switch our bodies from being sugar burning or glucose burning machines to being fat burning machines. We're going to go into why that's important and why that's helpful, but let's get that figured out first. So when you have a diet that has a significant restriction of carbohydrates, there is no glucose hanging around. Almost all of the energy for cellular function comes from the fat that is either in your diet or the fat that is being broken down from your hips or your belly, your fat storage. Protein is essential to diet. You must have protein in order to have a properly functioning cellular system, because we need those amino acids. But when amino acids are not fully utilized, they will be broken down into glucose, and there'll be a little bit of insulin still being used to get that protein-derived glucose into the cells. But when we have no real carbohydrates in our diet, then we are relying almost 100% on the fat to provide us with energy. So let's talk about why that's important. Let's first look at glucose. Glucose, sugar, is a great thing in some ways. It's quickly metabolized, very easy to get your energy very quickly by ingesting something with glucose. But there are some problems with it. Number one, it does have a higher level of free radical production. The breakdown of glucose within the cell results in production of free radicals, which are highly damaging to the cellular structure. The most important thing is that glucose requires insulin to be taken up by individual cells and also to be stored. There's something called insulin resistance, and this is something that I think very few people understand. It is extremely common. It is at the heart of this whole epidemic of diabetes and prediabetes. Insulin resistance is a condition where your cells throughout your body are no longer sensitive to that insulin. Remember, I said insulin is the key that is used to unlock the door that opens the door and allows the glucose to go into the cell that desperately needs energy. Well, I don't know. Think of it like maybe the lock gets rusty. Maybe it needs a little WD-40 or something, but that insulin will not open the door. That is insulin resistance. Why cells get insulin resistance is the topic of extensive research, which I'm not going to even try to even understand, much less express to you. But let it be said that insulin resistance is the foundation of many, many different symptoms and signs of significant chronic disease. And the thing that you have to understand is that you can develop insulin resistance and not know it. 80% of people who are insulin resistant, have insulin resistance, otherwise known as prediabetes, have no clue, just like me. What is the problem with being insulin resistant? It is the beginning of diabetes. When your glucose cannot go into the cells because your insulin isn't working anymore, isn't being recognized anymore, the glucose goes up, the pancreas goes, oh, I better make some more insulin, makes more insulin, insulin levels go up, but it's still not getting the glucose in. The glucose continues to rise, the insulin continues to rise, the glucose rises, the insulin rises, and suddenly you find yourself in full-blown diabetes. And the reason for that is because your insulin has dropped out, because your pancreas has given up. It says, I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to produce any more insulin. And that's when glucose starts to rise to very, very dangerous levels. And that's when people have the symptoms of diabetes. This is something that we all need to be fully aware of, because it is totally preventable. It is totally reversible. And we can do that through dietary and other lifestyle maneuvers. Well, what happens with insulin resistance? The typical thing is that you get, it's the obese person, especially people with what they call central obesity, belly fat. They typically have high triglycerides and cholesterol, typically high blood pressure, high blood glucose. That's all of those things define the metabolic syndrome. But you don't have to have metabolic syndrome to have insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is also associated not only with diabetes, but the development of cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, inflammatory changes, and we might not even know about it. What's the answer? Well, there are many answers. We know that modern medicine has the answer of metformin. If you go into full-blown diabetes, they give you insulin, right? Well, there's another way that we can look at, and this is what I'm doing, which is looking at using ketones as my energy source rather than glucose. What's so great about ketones? We've talked about how it works when there's no carbohydrate in the diet. The ketones are liberated from the fat stores, or you use the fat that's in your diet. You can use fats for energy, no problem. The body loves it. But the great thing is that ketones do not require insulin to be taken up into the cells. They're also, the metabolism of ketones is not associated with nearly as much free radical production as is with glucose. The brain, the kidneys, the heart, there's evidence they actually function better on ketones than on glucose. And very important to me, and I'll talk about this in just a few minutes, there are proven potential benefits, in the area of neurodegenerative changes, like Alzheimer's, like traumatic brain injury, like multiple sclerosis, cancer, the reversal of metabolic syndrome, epilepsy, autism, all kinds of, and there's a long list. So there's some real potential benefits for ketone use, turning yourself into a ketone burning machine rather than a sugar burning machine. Now, let's talk about those macros. There's just 3 kinds of macros: the fat, the protein, and the carbohydrates. The standard American diet here, and this is just an example, way heavy on the carbohydrates. And all carbohydrates are 100% broken down into glucose, which increases insulin need. And then, of course, the standard American diet typically has a good bit of fat, but it's usually not good fat. A strict ketogenic diet is indeed very strict. 75% of your calories, of your energy source, comes from fat, but it is a specific kind of fat. It's healthy fat, and we'll talk about that. 20%, remember I said proteins are essential in your diet. You must have proteins. Typically 20% of the energy source will be from proteins. Talk about what kind, and then the amount that is derived from carbohydrates, which are directly broken down into glucose, is restricted to 5%. That's the strict ketogenic diet. Now, there are lots of variations, and as you look at the different folks that talk about this, you'll see that there is some different definitions out there. But basically, if you look down at the bottom of the slide here, there's some modifications, and this is what I've been doing. I've been deriving approximately 60 to 70% of my calories per day from healthy fats, and then the remaining percentage I pretty much split in 2 between carbohydrates and the protein. And as you research, you can find out the options. And then what's even better is that if you really get committed to this, you can do your own day-by-day testing to find out exactly what works best for you, because everybody has a different body. We all have different biochemistries, and we all respond to dietary or nutritional changes in different ways. Now we get to what you want to know. Well, what can I eat on this crazy diet? So let's go over that. The healthy fats. This is where you're going to get 60 to 70% of your calories on a daily basis. Healthy fats. These are not vegetable oils, not the canola oils, the sunflower oils, the vegetable oils. No. One of your most important sources is going to be coconut oil or MCT oil. I like to have at least two tablespoons a day. Avocados are a wonderful source of healthy fats. Organic ghee, which is basically clarified butter. The wonderful thing about ghee is that you can leave it at room temperature and it's perfectly fine. Olive oil, nuts, and animal fats. Your proteins, you want to make sure that since you are working really hard to improve your overall metabolism, you want to feed your body the best proteins. Grass-fed meat, pasture-raised chicken and pork, wild-caught fish. What's the common denominator here? They aren't raised in farms or in pens or in cages. The eggs, you know those cute little eggs you can buy at the store now? They all have these adorable little cartons. Like I like to buy al fresco eggs where the chickens are running around out in the pasture. I don't have the benefit of having my own chickens like some people on this webinar, but you can buy them at the store. The meat does not have to be lean. But it's really important, of course, to avoid nitrates, like the weird stuff like some of the salamis, etc. So proteins, basic stuff. Carbohydrates. Okay, anything that's green and leafy, all your lettuces, kales, chard, all the things that are green and leafy, eat as much of that as you want. Pretty much any vegetable that grows above ground is fair game. You got to be a little concerned about the vegetables that grow underground because they store glucose. They have what they call higher glycemic index. So you can eat onions and carrots, but you might want to be really careful about how much you eat, and you absolutely have to avoid tubers, the potatoes, and that includes sweet potatoes. I know I'm going to miss them this Thursday, but the reason for that is that they're storehouses for glucose. Just be aware if you're trying to really pack this in hard that there are certain vegetables that have a higher glycemic index, meaning higher glucose content than others. But you can easily find references that tell you which ones. The things to avoid, this is the most critical. All grains, you must avoid all grains. Even the nice little clean eating grains like quinoa and buckwheat and all that, gotta go. Sugar in any form, no. That includes agave and all those things. You can use healthy artificial sweeteners or what do you call substitute sweeteners like erythritol or stevia. I would think those would be the only two you could use. No honey, no processed food, no farmed raised pork or fish, no potatoes. Most fruit you really need to avoid. It's got sugar in it. I do enjoy a few raspberries or blueberries here or there. Beans are loaded with glucose, and there's no reason whatsoever to eat low-fat dairy, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go to the next slide. And so I know you're going, well, what about my yogurt? Okay, dairy. If you have dairy issues, obviously you should avoid that. But if you are able to enjoy dairy, you can have dairy on the keto, but just be aware you're going to be getting some carbohydrates, some significant carbohydrates, while you also get healthy fats. So just be aware of what you're doing. Fruit, no, you just need to give it up for a while. I think that as you get further along into the ketogenic diet, you can start enjoying some, but the majority of the most yummy fruit, of course, is all the things that we really can't have on keto, which is bananas and mangoes and pineapple, just loaded with sugar. And you're going, how can I live without something sweet? Well, it's interesting. You can. I've learned you can. There are some wonderful snacks that you can create using stevia that will give you that little sweet edge on it. But also the more important thing is to realize after you've been on this for a little while, you lose your desire for sweets, and you lose your desire for bread. You just don't crave it anymore. So don't worry about it. And then what about the wine? What about the alcohol? Well, it's not forbidden. And actually there's some great references in in the bulletproof, I'll tell you that, in the bulletproof reference, there's some great references on the glucose content of different alcoholic drinks. The type of alcohol that has the least impact on your diet are the spirits, like scotch and vodka, the clear distilled spirits, for those of you who partake in those. Wine is okay, but it does have 3 to 6 grams of carbohydrates in it. So you're going to want to watch that, and you can't have 2 or 3 or 4 glasses. It won't do you any good whatsoever. So alcohol is not forbidden, but again, you have to realize that if you're using some of your carbs for alcohol, that's probably not doing you the best service as far as your nutrition goes, right? Okay. Some daily hacks. I included these in the Keto 101 cheat sheet. You've got to drink plenty of fluid. You're going to be clearing out lots of toxins. You're going to be clearing out lots of glycogen from the liver. All of that requires a lot of fluid. You should make sure that you're getting trace minerals because you're going to have a decreased variety in your diet for right now. Just make sure you put lots of Celtic or sea salt on your food. That will probably take care of it. Learn to love keto coffee or keto tea. It is the best way ever to have breakfast in the morning. You'll learn about that as you look at the references. You must use an app to track your daily intake. It's impossible to do this without tracking. And on the cheat sheet, I mentioned MyFitnessPal. It's a great one. It's super easy to use. My advice, be really gentle on yourself the first week or two you're on this. You're going to have a little bit lower energy. Sometimes you may feel kind of rotten for a couple of days as you go off the glucose. Don't be heavy and don't be training for a marathon. Just be easy on yourself. Be good to yourself. Drink plenty of water, get plenty of rest, and be diligent about working through that initial stages of becoming adapted to the ketone eating plan. And my advice, although not everyone is like this, I kept my meal plan super simple. The last thing I wanted is to have to learn how to cook some new way. So I just got really simple meal plans for the first couple of months. I'm at the point now where I'm ready to venture out a little bit. And if my husband joins me on this, he's the cook and he'll come up with some great recipes that are keto friendly. But you don't have to get real fancy if you don't want to. Okay, here's the resources. We are going to make these available to you. You can scribble them down if you want, but we'll make sure that these are posted on our Facebook page, which we're going to tell you about. There are tons of fantastic resources out there. The first place I went was, of course, the internet and looked for the great websites, and all of these that are listed, these are awesome. They're pretty consistent in how they discuss and define ketogenic diet. They have a little different take here or there. Be aware they're all selling stuff. That doesn't bother me at all, but they are selling their plans, so just be aware of that. There's some fantastic cookbooks out there. I have them, and I think I'm ready to start using them or give them to my husband to use. And then there's thought. There are so many thought leaders on this. Not everybody is a keto fan. You'll find some of my favorite thought leaders in the world of nutrition and integrative medicine are not proponents of ketogenic diet. But on the other hand, many of them are. These are a list of the ones that I have been reading quite a bit from, and they each have their own books on. Dave Asprey, David Perlmutter, Dominic D'Agostino. He is a professor right here at University of South Florida. Dr. Joseph Mercola, I think many people have seen. And then there's this foundation, Charlie Foundation. It was started by parents that were proponents of the ketogenic diet for treatment of severe childhood epilepsy, but it's grown from that to be a foundation that supports the ketogenic diet for many kinds of medical conditions. So fantastic resources. There are countless others. Now, the big question that people have, maybe I would say, is, well, is it safe to not eat carbohydrates? Well, I listened to a very interesting YouTube video today that addressed that very point. I'm not prepared from an intellectual standpoint to do a detailed defense of the ketogenic diet in terms of its medical safety. But this is what I learned from listening to this professor as well as several others who attended the seminar that was recorded for my later benefit. And these are folks like from Duke University, Wake Forest University, University of Southern California, Cornell, all the big names. These are people who have strong interest in either obesity medicine or integrative medicine. And they have done clinical research on ketogenic diet. And the man I listened to today says, I wasn't a proponent of ketogenic diet, but my patients, he ran an obesity clinic, my patients kept coming back to me with success stories on this. So I decided that I might want to do some research. He said, but the first thing I had to do was to make sure it was medically safe for patients to go on to this kind of diet if I was going to recommend it. So he went through his explanation of how he found complete validation that ketogenic is medically safe. His statement was this. He said, the body needs no carbohydrates to exist. I thought that was like, are you sure? He said, yes, I'm sure. He said, we absolutely must have fats and we absolutely must have proteins. But protein breakdown results in enough glucose production to provide the glucose that is needed for certain processes that can only run on glucose. So all I can say is if all of these researchers from these prestigious schools have committed their clinical practice and their clinical research to investigating this, I say it's bound to be safe. So what I would say from my personal standpoint is that I'm a little concerned about making sure I'm getting a full breadth of micronutrients. I'm making sure that I'm taking adequate mineral supplementation. And I am looking forward to watching my laboratory values of my micronutrients and my glucose, et cetera. And also making sure that I'm not breaking down muscle as I do this. I'll be monitoring myself, and I find out that it's not the best thing for my body, then I'll switch to something different. So enough said about that. Let's wrap up with what I think is the most exciting part about the ketogenic diet. Now, the ketogenic diet is absolutely proven to result in weight loss. Now, not everybody responds immediately, and sometimes a good nutritionist, a good integrative physician is needed to help tweak a person with severe metabolic syndrome, tweak their biochemistry so that they can lose weight on ketogenic diet. But the literature is full of amazing success stories with that. There's no doubt that along with the other clean eating plans, there is definitely decreased inflammation and a positive impact on autoimmune disease. But the things that excite me the most about the ketogenic diet is its proven impact on prediabetes and full-blown diabetes. I heard testimonies from these doctors today of patients who have been on insulin for 25 years going off insulin on the ketogenic diet. The treatment of high cholesterol and high triglycerides, metabolic syndrome, we've mentioned, cardiovascular disease. I am totally enamored with the use of the ketogenic diet with Alzheimer's disease and other neurologic conditions. And if you want to have your mind blown, listen and read about the ketogenic diet in the treatment and prevention of cancer. It will blow your mind. My favorite book on all of this is the one that's listed here, Dr. Dale Bredesen, who I think is just, I'm in awe of his expertise on how to attack a significant disease like Alzheimer's. And part of his approach, only a part of it, is to use the ketogenic diet. So, those are the things that I have learned about. But, we all have, I think all of us are interested in better health, and we all kind of already know the basics about what we need to do. But what happens? Sometimes the desire doesn't quite match with the motivation. And that is really the biggest barrier, I think. It's not lack of knowledge, it's lack of motivation, or the lack of the ability to proceed on one's goals. That's a barrier to healthy living. And my dear friend and business partner, Lisa Hinke, has become quite the expert in talking about that. So we're going to turn this over to her and let her give a little information on that aspect of it. And then we're going to open up to some questions. So Lisa, take it on.
Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, yep, I'll do it.
Thanks so much, Barbara, for sharing what you've gone through. It's been interesting to watch, and I'm committing to starting not till January though. Whether excuse me, whether or not keto is right for you, it is truly a challenge to stay healthy, to get healthy, and vibrant health does not happen by chance. You know, sometimes days, weeks, months go by in this fast-paced world when we know we want to make a change, but it just seems like nothing happens. Change, even thinking about change, can be stressful. Next slide. But one of the things that I've learned about change, and they've got studies that review this, is that if we try to change too much at once, it is incredibly difficult to become successful. And so what I've learned, especially at Duke, is that change is successful when we can become confident in that change. So it's best to start out making small changes. Don't try to change the world. So as you look at your health, there's three things to look at. It's where are you now? Why do you want to change? What would improve in your life? Maybe you want energy to play with your children or grandchildren. And then once you have been very specific with yourself in where you are now and why you would want to change, then experiment with one or two small changes that moves you to where you want to be. Do not beat yourself up for experiments that didn't work, but celebrate the successes, the small successes. And as you celebrate the successes, you'll see what you should be trying to do next. And then there's a next step and a next step. And pretty soon I'm seeing people climb mountains, one step at a time. Next slide. So what we have, and as we're concluding, we want to challenge you. We want to challenge you to question your assumptions about your health. Question what other people say, what other people, somebody says this and somebody says that. Well, question that and then learn. Learn about your health. Learn about what you want to do. Don't assume. There's so many things that people say, well, I heard this, therefore it must be true. So we're asking you to question what your assumptions are. Take the time to learn, because no one is going to really be concerned about your health except you and your family. And then we're asking you to join us in this journey of health. And how you can do that, next slide, is to connect with us on iwsipro.com. And we will then send you a link to our Facebook page. And on our Facebook page, we are going to be posting what we learn. You will be able to connect with other people in the group. We will do our best to answer any non-specific medical questions. And so our passion is for this to be a group of people who want to journey in vibrant health together. So what we are asking is, if you have any questions, if you touch your screen, I think you can see the chat box down at the bottom. Move your cursor or do, Control H to go to the chat box. Let's see, are there any questions in the chat?
None right now, which is very surprising.
Well, Barbara, I have a question.
Okay.
You had said that the first week that you, had a little less energy, etc. What did you find? Did something cause that, or was it just part of how changing this diet goes?
Oh, okay. So there's a phase that you go through that's the adaptation phase to the ketogenic diet. It's called keto adaptation, switching your body from not craving and running for the sugar and switching to the ketones. And it's basically going through a withdrawal. You're addicted. Our bodies are addicted to sugar, whether we eat a lot of them or not. Our bodies are absolutely,
Addicted. Okay.
you know, we run on sugar. So there's you don't feel so good for a few days. Typically, it's called the keto flu, but you can do a lot to avoid that. And I would advise people to start on the fat intake first, and don't restrict calories for the first few days. If you're trying to lose weight, do not restrict your calories. Eat plenty of fats, get plenty of fats into your body, and don't go crazy with the carb restriction immediately. Go 25, 30% carbs, and then after a week, go down to whatever you decide is best for you. Drinking lots of fluid, and then they say drinking bone broth and lemon water, all those kinds of things are helpful.
That's where all the bone broth.
Don't take Tylenol, though. That's a bad thing.
Rosemary, we've got a couple questions here. Rosemary is asking, does the keto have an effect on the kidneys at some point?
Okay, well, there's none that I know of. So I know that the kidneys do run very well on ketones. I've seen that actually stated in one of the research papers. So there's no detrimental impact on the kidneys. Now, people who have kidney stones, who have such a significant problem with kidney stones, they need to be aware that there may be some excessive secretion of minerals in that initial phase. Might precipitate a kidney stone. Again, lots of fluids.
Okay. Jessica is asking, in terms of fat as the main energy source, how does this diet work in endurance athletes? We wonder why Jessica's asking that.
Yeah, I wonder which Jessica that is. Well, not being an endurance athlete myself, I am no expert on that. However, there is a very robust discussion going on right now on the internet among some of these thought leaders on using the ketogenic diet for endurance athletes. It goes well beyond my level of understanding, but honestly, for any of these questions, if someone really has a burning desire to know more about something specific, I'm more than happy to help you research it. But I do know that what I will say is that you do need to be aware that your body will respond differently initially to being on ketones compared to glucose. And learning what that difference is important. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's just different. And then once you're fully keto adapted, I understand that the athletes actually do quite well. Testimonies, I can't give somebody else's testimony, but I just heard mention about people who, instead of, on their marathons, instead of slurping down the high glucose, little packet, whatever those things are called, they were great because they had such ketones last for so long in your system.
Wow.
They last for hours as an energy source as opposed to glucose. So Jessica, let's learn about that together.
We have another question here. Please explain how a fitness professional, bodybuilder, powerlifter can experience success on the ketone diet. That may be kind of the same.
Yeah, I think I just answered that and said I don't know because I'm not that at all. I'm definitely not a bodybuilder and I'm not an endurance athlete. But what I'll do though is this is a perfect example of how we're going to use our Facebook page. Let me do some research on that, and I will post some quality comments and articles that I find exactly on that.
Right. Okay.
That's a promise.
Donna's just saying thanks for the webinar, and she's curious about this diet. And
okay.
Rosemary says also, since A1C is not a usual annual blood test, would there have to be a medically necessary reason to get it taken at the annual physical?
Oh, that is such a great question, Rosemary. Okay, so typically what the internist will do, or family doctor, they'll do a fasting blood glucose. And they'll say, oh, it's less than 90. Awesome, you're fine. Well, you don't, and if it's over 100, oh, you got to worry. Well, this isn't like 89 is good and then 91 is bad. It's always a gradation. So what happens is that if over time your blood glucose is showing that you're on the high normal side, then you should have an A1C done. That's how I found out. You should have an A1C done, because if, for those that don't know, A1C measures your overall glucose for the past 3 months. It measures the amount of glucose that's stuck to the outside of your red blood cells. Your red blood cells last for 3 months. So they take a sample of your red blood cells and measure the glucose, and they get a really good idea of how much you've been eating. So I think this is a great example of how we need to take our healthcare into our own hands and ask for what we need.
Okay,
great question.
Sandra asks us that she's been looked for grain-fed butter, but haven't found anything labeled as such.
Yeah, it's not grain-fed. If I wrote that on my slides, it's grass-fed, not grain-fed. Grass-fed butter, grass-fed butter. But grass-fed butter is available now at Publix, but you don't have Publix in Texas. And at most, I think you could find it.
Yeah, I think you could just ask them, or ghee in the jar. That's there.
Yeah, but I will say ghee doesn't taste as good in the coffee as the grass-fed butter. I tried it.
Okay. The next question is cauliflower allowed? I will look for a reply.
Okay.
Here, I'm having to leave shortly for.
I'm already. Yes, cauliflower is fine as a cruciferous vegetable. It grows above ground. It is something that does have a little bit more carbohydrates than just eating the leafy greens. If you are going to do the strict 5% keto, you're not going to want to have cruciferous vegetables every single day. If you're in the 15 to 20%, you can definitely work them in. That's what I do. I eat broccoli almost every day.
And Betsy says that she and her husband started last week and love how they're feeling, and cauliflower rocks. That's great. And Donna is a vegan. Would I be able to do this if I give up grains and legumes and fruits? It's not much less for me.
Okay, so that's a super good question. And again, that's something that one of the topics that I have not had either a personal interest in investigating or time to, but it's a really valid question. So let me do some research on that. And Donna, I will, make sure you are registered on our website, and I will make sure you get some information that I find, or at least point you in the direction. I know that there are definitely vegans who have gone ketogenic, but you're right, it would take some work. Yeah.
And there was another question on vegan, and your big sister said she made a mistake. So there you go.
Oh, good.
We've got Jenna said Trader Joe's, Wolf Foods has grass-fed butter. And the next is, what do you use the ghee on, or the grass-fed butter?
So ghee, okay, let's just talk about cooking a little bit. So next to the stove now, of course, we have olive oil. We always have, but now we also have a little pot of organic coconut oil, and we have a little pot of organic ghee. And so wherever we used to use olive oil, we never use any other kind of oil anyway, but wherever we used to use olive oil, or bacon fat.
Yeah, right.
We use now coconut oil or ghee. And they have obviously a little bit different flavor, but you can use it for sauteing, for pan frying. I'm not a baker myself. I am confident you can use it in baking. The other thing that I'm going to start, and I'll post some recipes for this, is I'm going to start making something called fat bombs, fat bombs, BOMBS. And what those are, they're little yummy nuggets of coconut oil or ghee mixed in with carb-free, like coconut flour and seasonings, and they're apparently incredibly yummy. So I think you can use it for all kinds of things like that.
Okay, and I just don't know if anybody can see this.
I got a little bit of a glare there.
Oh, all right.
Oh, there you go. Put it all the way up. There you go. There you go.
There's the ghee butter. It comes in a little jar, so it was convenient. Well, we're going to wrap up here. Betsy's letting us know that Publix has cauliflower steaks. The recipe's delicious. And I think there's one more. Nope. That is it.
Can I just say one thing? All of you guys, if any of you decide to go keto or any other diet, I don't care, but post your progress or your decision on our Facebook page. Let people know what you're doing. And if you find a great article that is, that really looks well researched, please feel free to post it. Let us know. We'll look at it first and for approval, etc. And if it looks like something that everybody should see, we'll get it out there and give you credit.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be with everyone tonight.
What's our next webinar?
Oh, wait. What is what I found is sleep. Sleep is a meso problem for a lot of people. So our next webinar is going to be some really great techniques on how to enhance your sleep.
Yes.
We don't know when it is, but we'll do it.
Yeah, it'll be, well, it won't be next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Good night.